Wet snow began falling after dark. At first, it settled quietly across the abandoned orchard. Then the flakes grew heavier, sticking to every branch instead of sliding away. The old apple trees had not been pruned in years. Their crowns were packed with dead limbs, crossing shoots, and long grey branches that bent toward the ground. Maya Brooks stood beneath the remaining section of the barn roof and listened. A sharp crack came from the upper orchard. One of the untouched trees split through its center. Two heavy sides fell apart beneath the snow, exposing a dark hollow inside the trunk. Farther down the slope stood several trees Maya had spent weeks cutting back. Their crowns looked thin, uneven, and almost unfinished. Neighbors had laughed when they saw them. After Maya's pruning, some of the trees appeared to have only a few branches left. Now snow passed through the open spaces instead of building into heavy white platforms. But the first tree Maya had worked on was beginning to lean. A long wound ran down one side of its trunk where she had made a bad cut weeks earlier. Snow collected on the remaining limbs, pulling against the damaged wood. Another crack sounded in the darkness. Maya could not tell whether it came from the restored section or from another tree higher on the hill. Before we return to the beginning, subscribe if you enjoy quiet stories about people who notice life where everyone else sees only ruin. 7 weeks earlier, Maya had bought the abandoned apple farm near Edneyville, North Carolina, for $2,400. The house was gone. The barn had partially collapsed. Blackberry vines filled the rows, and 46 old apple trees stood across the slope like gray skeletons. The former owner told Maya that the orchard was dead. Calvin, a neighboring farmer, agreed. He laughed when he saw her property papers and pointed toward the twisted branches. In his view, Maya had purchased expensive firewood that she would have to cut herself. Maya walked to the nearest tree and removed a thin gray twig with her pruning knife. The outside looked dry, but beneath the bark was a narrow line of moist green wood. The tree was not dead. At least, not all of it. Maya began checking the trees one at a time. She made small scratches in suspicious branches rather than cutting them immediately. Where the layer beneath the bark remained green, the branch was alive. Where the wood was brown, brittle, and dry all the way through, it was already dead. The orchard looked worse from a distance than it did up close. Many upper limbs had failed, but living wood remained lower on the trunks. Several trees still had strong main branches hidden beneath tangled growth. Others carried healthy sections beside hollow or rotting limbs. Maya chose the largest apple tree near the barn as her first restoration. She wanted to open the crown quickly. The center was crowded with branches rubbing against one another. Dead wood crossed above living shoots. Several heavy limbs had grown too far outward and now pulled against the trunk. Maya climbed a short orchard ladder and began sawing through one thick branch. She cut from the top in a single pass. Before the saw reached the center, the weight of the branch pulled it downward. The limb broke early and tore a long strip of bark from the trunk. Maya froze. The fallen branch lay on the ground, but the damage continued far below the place where she had intended to cut. Her first attempt to save the tree had created a larger wound than the dead limb itself. An elderly former orchard worker named Isaiah later examined the trunk. He showed Maya that heavy branches had to be removed in stages. A first cut underneath prevented the bark from tearing. A second cut removed the weight. Only then could the final clean cut be made near the branch collar. But his more important warning concerned the entire orchard. Old trees could not be made young in a single afternoon. Removing too much living crown at once would shock them. Strong sunlight could burn bark that had been shaded for decades. The roots would respond by sending up masses of thin vertical shoots that produced little useful fruit. Maya had to move slowly. Dead wood first. Then broken branches. Then crossing limbs. Only after that could she decide what else the tree could afford to lose. Maya changed the way she worked. She stopped trying to make every tree look balanced. Each apple tree had survived differently. One still had a living center but little strength on the outside. Another had lost its top yet retained 2 broad lower branches. A third looked solid until Maya found a large limb that sounded hollow when she tapped it. She began with dead and dangerous wood. Heavy branches came down in several controlled cuts. Smaller limbs that rubbed against one another were removed to create space. Maya left enough living crown for each tree to continue feeding its roots. The work made the orchard look worse. Dense grey shapes became thin, irregular silhouettes. Some trees stood like broken posts with only a few side branches. Others had wide, empty spaces where dead limbs had hidden the sky. Calvin stopped beside the fence with two neighbors. They laughed and pointed toward the tree near the barn. Before Maya touched it, the crown had at least looked full. Now it seemed unfinished and damaged. Maya continued cutting. She left several trees untouched so she could compare them with the restored section. The early results were not encouraging. One apple tree had been opened too aggressively. After several warm days, it produced dozens of thin vertical shoots. They rose straight upward through the center, replacing one kind of crowding with another. A second tree barely responded at all. Two others showed green wood only near the base. Their upper structures were too far gone to restore as productive orchard trees. Maya counted again. Out of 46 apple trees, only 18 appeared strong enough to justify years of careful work. The rest would not return simply because she wanted them to. She marked the 18 recoverable trees with small pieces of plain cloth. No labels, no promises, just a way to remember where living structure remained. Then the weather report changed. A late winter storm was moving across the mountains. It would bring heavy, wet snow, the kind that clung to branches and tested every weak connection in an old tree. The snow arrived in the evening. It collected first on the highest branches, then on every crossing limb beneath them. The untouched apple trees held the wet snow like nets. Each crowded crown trapped more weight. Maya stayed near the barn. Walking beneath overloaded branches in darkness would have been dangerous. There was nothing she could safely repair until the storm ended. The first break came from an unpruned tree near the top of the slope. A major branch dropped and tore open the trunk. Soon afterward, another untouched tree split at the central fork. Beneath the broken wood was a wide area of dark decay that had been hidden inside the crowded crown. The restored trees also bent under the snow. Their open branches were not protected by some miracle. Thin limbs bowed, and wet snow remained along the tops of the larger ones. But much of it fell through the spaces Maya had created. The tree near the barn worried her most. It was the one she had injured with her first careless cut. The stripped section of bark had weakened one side. As the remaining limbs carried the snow, the trunk leaned several inches farther. Maya heard a low cracking sound. She could not see whether the trunk had opened. By morning, the snow had stopped. 3 of the untouched apple trees were badly damaged. 1 had split completely. 2 had lost major structural limbs. The restored section had losses too. A smaller branch had broken on one tree. Several fresh cuts needed inspection. The damaged trunk near the barn had developed a new crack above the old wound. Yet most of the 18 selected trees remained standing. The snow had not proven that Maya had saved the orchard. It had shown her which trees still had enough sound wood to survive another season, and which trees had been held together only by the dead branches surrounding them. When spring arrived, Maya returned to the orchard with smaller tools. She did not perform another heavy pruning. The trees had already lost enough. She removed branches broken by the snow, cleaned damaged edges, and watched for new growth. On the tree near the barn, she reduced the weight above the cracked section but left enough living wood to support recovery. Of the 46 original apple trees, 18 began producing healthy shoots. 12 formed blossoms. The flowering was weak and uneven. One tree opened only a few clusters near a lower limb. Another bloomed on one side while the opposite side remained nearly bare. A cold night damaged part of the early blossom before bees had finished moving through the orchard. By summer, a small number of apples remained. They were not uniform. Some were scarred. Several fell before ripening. Others stayed small because the old trees could not support a heavy crop. Maya did not fill a truck with perfect fruit. In autumn, she collected only several wooden crates from the strongest trees. The harvest did not repay the purchase price or the weeks of labor, but it was more fruit than the abandoned orchard had produced in years. Calvin came to the property during the final picking. He studied the tree near the barn, the same tree he had once considered firewood. Young branches now grew beside the old trunk, and several apples hung from one surviving limb. He no longer laughed. Instead, he asked how Maya knew which branch to remove first. Maya took a pruning knife and lightly scraped the bark from a thin grey twig. A green line appeared beneath it. The following winter, she continued working only with the 18 recoverable trees. She did not try to save every trunk merely because it still stood. At the end of the season, Maya cut the dry tip from one small branch. Beneath the grey bark, the wood was still green. That colour did not promise a full harvest. It only showed her where the work was worth continuing.